So welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Deepen, and I'm pastor of the Village. And across from me is Andy Littleton, who is pastor of
Mission Church.
And we've been doing this podcast for 3 years. And we probably had our most political conversation.
Yeah, maybe. We've talked Trump in the past.
We have, but we did a little bit more of that today. I would like to say a few things about Faith Over Breakfast podcast. One is people need to understand this is just a conversation between two pastors. We are not saying that this is what Mission Church believes or the Village Church believes, or, to be honest, what we believe, in the sense that we are in process.
Yeah, if you had to get us to write out statements, you would not get what you hear today, because this is us thinking something through together as friends.
And this is also, I think, a privilege when you listen to this podcast, because you're getting to listen to ideas develop, thoughts develop. So even if we say something theologically, that maybe people might kind of, what? We're in process thinking those things through. Yeah. And you get to kind of be part of that with us. So.
And that's the big idea of this podcast, is that we're inviting you into a personal conversation. So we recognize the risk.
That's a big risk.
In doing that, but we also think that in the space of pastor podcasts, and we long to hear more vulnerability from our fellow leaders.
Our fellers. That may be our problem right there, is our fellers.
I think we long for that, and we're trying to exhibit it. And we don't always, sometimes we see things right down the line the same. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're not even sure, because we're thinking about something for the first time with you right here. So, good reminder. That's kind of what the podcast is. And thank you for joining and listening to our rambling.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Look at that. Checkity check. There I am. Where are you?
Check.
Oh, yeah. There you are.
Nice.
Check.
Loud and clear.
Hello, Andy. It's been 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's not my fault. I mean...
Guess not.
I don't know why I said that.
I don't know why you said that either, but now I have to go cry. I'm sad. I'm going to try this new Relaxed Eric podcast.
Oh, yeah.
See how long this arm can extend.
Yeah. This might be photo worthy as we jump in.
Maybe I should just also put on my hood. I can't even put on my hood, so it doesn't matter. You're taking a picture of me. Relaxed, Eric.
There it is. Well, hey, good morning. So, we didn't meet last week. You
really
texted
loud.
me. You texted me. Here's the thing about pastors and texting.
Pastors and texting.
I think I got a text from you. What did it say? It was just like, I will not podcast or something.
It was not, I will not podcast.
It wasn't that.
That's very mean of you.
But the one yesterday, I suggest a topic, and I get
sure.
See, the way this is, we all know how texting goes. Who knows what? Sure could be. Sure.
I think my text was a little bit more vulnerable. I said, I need to cancel tomorrow's podcast. I have a need.
A need. Wow. Yeah, and I didn't even go, Eric, tell me about your need.
You didn't ask how I was doing or anything.
I just said, Sure,
exactly. It's a lot of soul care going on between the two of us.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's just genius.
Yeah, I figured you've created a church for yourself to where I'm not really necessary in your life. You did
come, Johnny, lately. I mean, you didn't like just start up at the beginning of caring. You didn't even know me.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So you've got some makeup work to do.
Oh, I do. Okay.
So you did text and say, "Hey, let's talk about the primaries and church and how those two are."
Yeah, I think I'm just
the person of faith involves themselves in these things.
Yeah, we had you were a part of a conversation with other pastors, kind of a presentation conversation on politics last week at our church, and then we've had an impeachment proceeding. We
did have an impeachment proceeding.
A couple of primaries now. So the Democratic presidential nominee, is getting worked out. And I think there's interest in this in our church. You were just telling me maybe before we came on the mic that the people in your church don't talk about this. Or not here, not at church.
Not at church. I think... It's not that politics is not something that people believe is part of their faith, but I think there's a sense that people are so vulnerable at this point in time, I think, and politics has become a place where you can actually really wound someone with what you have to say. And because... there was a presentation that was made to a lot of pastors about how political systems or political, what do you call them, factions, how we break up into different places.
Right.
But one of the things that they did say that I really appreciated these lectures was that there is this element of our politics becoming our religion.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you can really begin to hurt one another because you begin to connect the way you follow Jesus to an absolute in the way you follow politics or live out your political life. So that's very dangerous when you begin to sit down and talk. And so trying to, not have that be the primary part of our conversation.
Right. Yeah.
So
you're saying people get wounded. So in your church, the risk isn't.
Yeah, it's just not worth.
It's not worth the risk.
Yeah, it's not worth.
Why the risk? Do you think it in your?
Because I think it's our community is just so diverse, and it's. I mean, I would say that a good portion, and they're listening right now, so they can hear themselves divided out. But
hey, hello.
But there is a good section of people who are. What I would call, and I don't want to categorize them, but what I call one issue.
Trumpian nationalists?
No. We don't have any of those.
That just sounded.
I think just one issue voters in the sense that they walk with if you are unwilling to care for the person in the womb, you're probably most likely not going to take care of the person outside of the womb. And so that is their...
I don't know that I've heard it's ever framed that way.
That's a big time one that's kind of plays underneath a lot of people in our community. And so there's that one. And then there's a definite, what I would call moderate... I think we have mostly in our church, I would say maybe over half are modern liberals. So they're not the postmodern liberal, but they are definitely the modern liberal. And that's partly because we have a lot of older millennials and younger Xers in our community, and they tend to be still in the modern liberal.
When you're saying this, you're drawing a little bit from this presentation from last week in which Jim Mullins, who's one of the pastors of one of the Redemption churches in Tempe, he'd kind of said, we tend to think that there's the liberal conservative, but then he was talking about there's a modern liberal and a modern conservative, and then there's a postmodern liberal and a postmodern conservative, and he kind of identified what maybe the key word that those folks might stand on is, and who the patron saint of each one would be. Let's see if we can remember the modern liberal was progress, and the Clintons, maybe Barack Obama would have been the patron saint of the modern liberal.
And then your modern conservative
was...
Well, you could have Ronald Reagan as your...
Reagan or Bush or somebody like that. But what was the word? It was...
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of be a responsibility.
Responsibility.
Big thing.
Then the postmodern liberal
equity
was equality, and like somebody like
Alexandra Cortez, whatever
Ocasio-Cortez at the moment. Yeah,
she would be a good one. Bernie might fit in there.
Yeah, and then they also had, they were saying that there are people who are kind of on the cusp of, somewhere in between. I think Bernie was a little in betweeny on that one. But then you had the postmodern conservative, which was it safety or
safety was
protection,
the big one,
or something, and this like the slogan might be "Make America Great Again" or something of that. And, I almost wonder if
Trump would fit into that.
Except
he
was saying even he. Probably more the Steve Bannons of the world that kind of like shaped Trump's politics, probably really embody that
Koch
the most.
brothers, things like that.
So as you're that's what you're referring to,
and it's nothing new, because actually in Christianity, if you look historically over the last 150 years, there is, even within the church, a battle between who I would say the modern liberal, in which brought about the neo-Orthodox movement, and I in the sense that, so
you're talking in church
world.
Yes. Yeah.
So these things kind of have played out even in the church.
Yeah.
And anyway,
there are always systems of thought like modernism and postmodernism that get kind of tied together with political ideologies and then shape the way that people.
And I liked his chart.
Behave.
I thought his chart was really good. I disagreed with the centrist conversation, or even Jesus being any part of his chart, but I thought just as a diagram for the way people break down, pretty good.
And I wouldn't say I disagreed with it. What he was kind of proposing is that each one of those, if you took each one of those words, say that none of those are bad things, but when they're made ultimate things, they become like an idol to us, something that we must have and we worship, and we go out to the absolute edges of those ideologies when those become the most important. And Jesus is calling us toward one another, and he didn't necessarily say being a centrist, but he was in his graph, Jesus meets people in the center and draws them toward relationship with one another instead of away from one another, because some of the core pieces of their ideology aren't or are valid, though maybe not the utter extensions of them, which was an interesting way to think about it. And I would say we experienced some of that in our churches.
Yeah. I think probably just his understanding of power was not my, I kind of think that was probably not.
Yeah. You and Rod were definitely, having the power conversation.
Well, theologically we function from that position, and when we approach things most of the time. So that's going to influence the way we think about things.
And I don't know how much you two were, as you guys discussed that with him, you were actually saying different things, or if it had more to do with definitions of terms.
Right. Well, and to be honest, it was a very modern analysis of things. I mean, I think maybe a Christian postmodern person might come up with a different chart of understanding it. But it was a very modern way of like, let's categorize everybody, let's get it all set for you, and then here's a way that you can kind of reproduce this.
Yeah. And a postmodern would have just put a bunch of dots on the board
and then made a dance or something.
Yeah. And had and we all would have sang a Taylor Swift song. And
we would have sang Taylor Swift for sure, because she's real postmodern.
Oh, she is.
She's very postmodern. I think maybe a postmodernist might approach it more from a power perspective and a relationship perspective than from an analysis perspective.
Yeah.
Right. That would be more where that come from.
Yeah.
But anyway, regardless of all of that, how do churches handle all of this? Like, what do you do? Like, how do we handle?
Well, I think part of
or just encourage people in this process.
Yeah, part of what I was intrigued by is I thought of the churches sitting at the table. I think that mission in the village might see a little bit more of the political diversity actually happening in our churches. So that's part of why I wanted to know how these discussions go in your community. And so maybe forget at your church service, because maybe that's...
Yeah, well, I think some of the new, obviously, I feel like the makeup of our churches is important to think about before you even have that conversation. So the makeup of my church, though we've had an increase of Generation Z, so younger, the people are turning 18, 19, 20. But really the makeup of my church is somewhere between the age, like there's a good chunk of people between the age of 27 and 38, like or 37. There's a big chunk of them. And then there's a big chunk of people between what I would say 45 and 55.
Yeah.
So, and then we've got people jumping in all the different places, but partly that means that we have this group of people who are in the workforce trying to figure out, just their careers are just beginning, their families are just beginning. And then we have people who are sort of established in that and are thinking forward into, how do I retire someday? Now so that's even just in our economic complexity, makes it for an interesting conversation, I think. But the other issue is politically, like I said earlier, it's I would say probably a third conservative and 2/3 liberal.
Yeah.
So for the most part, and that's been true from the very beginning, even when we were what I would say bottom heavy, or mostly people in their young 20s, was that we were very liberal in our politics. So I always had to protect the conservative, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And trying to help people listen and honor people's positions.
Right.
And that's what we've talked about a lot. It's not, do you believe they're right or wrong? Is how do you honor someone's views and honor someone's story? And that's how you have the conversation. Until Donald Trump got elected, we never really had the political wave of things hit our church.
Yeah.
People were like, okay, yeah, this is where it's at. Yeah, I didn't vote for Obama, or I didn't vote for Bush, but that's okay. This is where we're at. And I'm disappointed about this social movement, or I'm excited about this social movement, but it was never like, let's take sides and have a political argument.
Yeah.
It happened and it happened in a lot of churches, but it happened in a way I did not expect, because I think of how vulnerable my community is, in that there, people who felt like Donald Trump was going to create an environment where their life was in danger, from their race to their their disabilities, those kinds of things. And in fact, numbers of people in our community during the first year of the election, or after Donald Trump was elected, were, yelled at, or were, they had experiences in the culture where the culture was changing.
Yeah.
And so it was scary for them. So all of a sudden the fear entered into our church. So it made the conversation a lot more difficult. Yeah. So I had a lot of conversations with people myself, trying to help them think things through, help them understand other people's experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know. How about you? What was sort of the beginning of that process? Because we're headed into a possibility of a second term of Donald Trump, which is a very polarizing figure in our culture.
Or if Donald Trump gets taken down off of the throne, what kind of upheaval? I mean, I don't know that. I wonder about that. Either way. And I think, so I was going to say, I was in a more conservative leaning church when Barack Obama was. I've had such an interesting journey, because I was in Chicago where Barack Obama was senator, in African American churches during the Bush part of the Bush era.
Sure.
So I lived that perspective from a church standpoint, and then interestingly, come back to Arizona just in time for Barack Obama to be elected president. and for a conservative community to be very concerned. And so that's probably the first year that I saw a church community get very uneasy was then. And I, to be honest with you, didn't quite I didn't understand quite what the concern was. I don't think I quite, even then in my early to mid 20s, I wasn't quite wrapping my mind around why are these people so worried about this guy? And especially because I just been in Chicago where everybody loved him in the church, right?
Yeah, well,
and
there wasn't a lot not to like. I mean, there was a few things, but
I'm saying my experience in this more conservative, not just the church, but part of our city,
right,
was that people were they were very concerned. And I felt this, like what you're saying. I was like, I like listening to him speak. I like that he advocates for the poor. So to me, I was like, those are good.
Yeah.
I also didn't understand a lot of political theory, which I'm still probably behind on. So I didn't understand some of the political reasons that people had. I just didn't quite put the pieces together. So then I, of course, am in my new, church situation with a lot younger crowd, a lot more politically diverse crowd for the election where Donald Trump becomes president. And I can't say our church was definitely affected. I feel like core people of our church had their opinions, but it didn't really impact the way that they lived with one another. But people that were peripheral to our church had some real conflict. And I think I just started to get concerned about the ways that this political conversation was dividing, especially that peripheral group and the potential it had to divide. And I don't know that we worked through that well. I think there were definitely some painful things that happened. I mean, I can think of one, a parent of somebody in our church that shared some very harsh things that because of the church relationship had become, social media friends with people in the church who were deeply offended by these things. And then all of a sudden their relationship is jeopardized, which is unfortunate. And I tried to reach out and engage with that. I don't know that was successful. So we've seen some of that, but I think the core group of our church is very diverse politically, but hasn't let that be a thing that divides them up spiritually. But at the peripheral folks struggle with it more. I don't know if that makes any sense. That's me rambling.
Sure, that makes sense.
Thinking it through.
So let's just go through a practical scenario, though. So maybe you and I you did this to me before, so I'm going to do it to you, a little bit of role playing. So sit down and I say to you, like, I'm a Donald Trump supporter, and you are, let's just say, for lack of better words, you're a postmodern Christian liberal. So you are somebody who believes in gay marriage, at least in the political realm. You believe that abortion rights, those kinds of things. Even though, again, you're a follower of Jesus and you go to Mission Church,
which I think both of those would have been modern liberal things too.
Some modern liberals are not necessarily there.
Somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. But let's just say that person sits down, and the other person is definitely me. I feel that, in particular, I've voted for Donald Trump and hang on to the Conservative Party mostly because of abortion and mostly because of marriage. These are my two big things that I'm holding on to. Uh-huh. I'm kind of moderate or don't really care about the social things. So, social programs, cutting for that, I don't really think about that at this point.
I can already tell you what I would do. I would just point out to you that Donald Trump's probably had so many abortions and that he's
You would do that?
so anti-marriage. Like, look at all the marriages he's broken. Hypocrite.
We may need
big, fat, orange hair, little hands.
So you'd say that thing?
Every single word. No.
Wow.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Are you sure?
But
should we cut that out of the podcast?
That's how the conversation can go.
Yeah, it can go. Right, we insult the person.
We insult, and I hear that a lot from friends of mine who are in more of the like postmodern liberal world, is like, we've got to tear that person and show and there's,
we got to deconstruct them and
it's
make them not relevant.
Yeah.
So I can hear from my end, I would say things to you if we were in the conflict, and these things I've heard of, like, so you believe in killing babies, so you're a murderer. Like, you promote murder. That's what you do.
And then I would say something like, so you say that, a woman can't decide what to do with her own body.
Right. You cut a man completely out of it, and he gets no choice. Right. I mean, we go back and forth, right? This is what happens. Right. So how do we sit down and have a godly, loving, caring conversation where I honor, like, where you've come, how you got to the place that you are, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sorry, I'm being a pain and not. I'm going the reverse of your role playing here, but
right.
But I'll stop. I'll stop.
I just like to say I cooperated with the last role play.
You did cooperate. I'll stop. No, I mean, you're right. Of course, like there's so much to it. I think the family and friends I have on both sides, like their story is a huge factor, and then their story and their ideology and how they came to it. And so, I mean, I think what we don't do is we don't take the time to even understand why this matters to you as deeply as it does. And the experiences in your life that have led you to this place and reinforced this for you. I mean, my hope, I mean, you're saying the role play, is that I would actually be even like open to your point of view. Right. And genuinely, honestly curious about it.
Right.
I mean, however the conversation exactly went.
Right.
If you actually were open to having a changed mind.
Right.
And if you actually were curious about the person, I think it would go very differently.
Yeah, I agree. And some of the things that are fascinating to me are that I have seen political arguments let me go back. I have seen arguments over who's the greatest quarterback be as fervently argued as political arguments, right? With the same sense of right and wrong and the same sense of, right, ideology, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that. We can easily slip into this almost religious-like thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the thing I think you have to start with is you have to be willing to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And actually believe that uncomfortability in conversation is healthy. Like that if you are saying things I disagree with and I feel uncomfortable, that's actually good. It's a good sign that I'm in a growth process, not in a, just a stagnant process. So,
which in a day when the main goal is to take care of yourself in any given situation and not have to, and to do whatever you need to do to get away from negative feelings and emotions and fears, like, that's a very countercultural thing to say.
Right.
Even though I think we all know how necessary it is.
Yeah.
And that people who do it do brave and wonderful things.
I would say the second thing then is that I can't demand that you understand me.
Right.
And I think, and there's a huge demand, especially as the younger the culture is, to be understood. Yeah. I think it's in older people, but I think older people got to the place where they don't give it. They're like, okay, fine. They've become almost, nobody's going to understand me. So they've almost become cynical.
Yeah.
A cynicism is set in. Yeah. But there is this demand, you need to understand me. And if you can put that aside and be uncomfortable, then you'll actually give the other person an opportunity to feel understood.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe brings us to our third idea, is that I have to see you in the way that Jesus sees you, not in the way really not in the way Satan wants me to see you, the enemy, the world, whatever, conglomerate of evil he wished to put together. And I think that's a big deal, because if I see how Jesus sees you, then I have to see you with compassion.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I wouldn't say something that might be hard for you to hear, but it would hopefully come out of a place where I'm listening and I love you, and so it's
out of a general or a genuine concern, which usually can be sensed to some degree.
Right.
Yeah.
So even like in that conversation, if I were a good Trump supporter and I'm listening to your understandings on abortion, instead of saying, well, you're wrong here, here, and here, and how can you possibly be part of these things? I could say things like, wow, like your positions are really hard for me. I don't know how to handle and reconcile that with my faith. How do you reconcile it with your faith? What do you do to get there? Because I want to know, because it might be helpful for me.
Right.
That all of a sudden is disarming and is saying, well, you have some insight into this, and it's hard for me. I'm the one who's having the issue, not you. And that can be a helpful way of dealing with things. I don't know.
Yeah. That's, strategic for sure. It feels like another piece of it. There's the uncomfortability, and then there's just the time, right? And there's a discomfort to time, but to really know people, I feel like we've become disinterested in long-term. There have been so many radio shows about politics, especially around holidays and Thanksgiving, how to deal with your cantankerous relative, right?
That is so. I would say this is so the modern age. That wasn't around when I was.
No, absolutely not.
Now we have all these instructions on how to deal with our family.
But I've heard, and politics is one of the big issues that people dread being around their family who disagrees.
Yes.
And there's the discomfort of it. And then I think just time spent with someone of a different opinion feels like lost, wasted, frivolous time. And it's like, people look around at all the other stupid things we're doing with time. Right. Wouldn't it, we waste so much frivolous time on YouTube, and binging every show on Netflix and on video game. So we can't take that time with a person who is related to us, who has a different viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you project out, and this is a little bit of maybe just kind of thinking about the way the disciples may have operated, and it's not necessarily something you can find these clues in Scripture, but you can't say this is the way it was.
It can't be proven. Sure.
But you look at the disciples, and you look at Peter and John and James. They're businessmen. They're at some level in bed with the Roman Empire and with the Jewish leaders, and that financially they're selling them fish. They're middle class people. You have zealots who are really there to overthrow. They want to overthrow the Roman Empire. They also have an issue with the religious, kind of elitism, and they're also there's a tax collector who's really so they're all there, and Jesus has no problem being in this dissonance, and he's got a different agenda, and his agenda is intriguing to all these different people who have different understandings of their political space and what's advantageous for their families and for their community. That fascinates me. Just thinking about that fascinates me, because we're called to imitate Jesus, which, you and I talked a little bit about that on our last podcast, and what the implications might be. We don't know if our implications that we put out on the last podcast or what exactly Jesus wants, but they challenge the way that we think about things. Jesus challenges the way we relate.
And I think all those people were, this gets actually a little bit to what Jim was saying. I know the diagram may not have
it's fine.
put it through. But I think that, what Jesus was saying was appealing and interesting to all these people from all their different perspectives with all their different goals. There was something in what Jesus was doing that had an appeal to all of them, but it wasn't any of their agendas specifically, because it wasn't like he broke off with Matthew and was like, hey, look, you and me we're on the same page here. These other guys they'll get it someday.
Yeah, well, you need to tie 30% because I know you're making a big, you're the big rich guy.
Like right? It was equally, dissonant. It was equally unique, from all of their perspectives, but it was appealing to all their perspectives. And so they came together and ended up embracing something else that was, otherworldly. It was really about something spiritual. And it had absolutely like social implications, and it affects how you live in the world, but it was kind of founded in spiritual places, I would say. And so, I feel like probably Christianity has just lost the art of that over and over and over, and then we lose it, and then we relearn a little bit of it, and we lose it, and we relearn. But that's a very interesting, I hope that we're seeing little glimpses of that in our churches with people with differing political perspectives continuing to come back and worship together.
Yeah.
And I feel like we are. That's one of the things I love a lot of things about my church, but that's one of the things I love is that I don't think just politically, socially, we're down the line the same. I think the only thing bringing us together is the gospel, ultimately, and then the ways that it's shaping us and changing us. We definitely had on Sunday, I know we have Trump supporters, and then we had a guy who was wearing a shirt that had Bernie Sanders slam dunking a basketball on Trump.
Wow.
And it didn't bother anybody. It's like...
Well, you don't know if it didn't bother. Nobody said anything.
By bother, nobody walked out.
Right, nobody
like broke relationship over it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can exist in the same space and be discussed.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So my friend had texted me and said that somebody thought that if Buttigieg got the nomination, the Democrats, that there was no chance that any Christians would vote for him over Donald Trump. Simple. And do you think that's true?
Well, I think from the conversation we've had up to this point, the answer is some would say no and would not, and some would be okay because they hold their political positions differently in connection to their faith.
Yeah. I think the amount of the amount of uniformity you believe there needs to be between your government and let's say the leadership within the Christian church, if you think those need to be very similar, that is going to affect how you do this. I think that I don't think that's a consistent standpoint, because even many people like Peter Weiner on who's a pretty well-known columnist would really take issue with the fact that evangelicals who say that they require these high standards for government officials went for Trump and kind of overlooked all of his sins. But Trump got there by promising he wasn't doing that anymore and promising he's changed and I'm on your side. I think that group that wants to see that continuity is whoever says the right talking points, they'll just go for them. I think people who are in evangelicalism and see a major difference, like a sphere sovereignty, if you wanted to use kind of the old Dutch Reformed way of talking about it, between church and state would have less trouble seeing somebody with an ideology that wouldn't fit their church still running the government if they had, generally good governmental principles.
Right. Well, and I think it makes it, I think a large, group of people who voted for Donald Trump the conservative section were able to vote for him because they were postmodern.
Yes.
And then so they were able to hold two conflicting value systems.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know if like a modern conservative, one who isn't influenced by postmodernism and believes in foundations, could vote for Donald Trump. And
I think those were the leaders that we saw who were like in the never Trump group before.
Yes.
And then nobody really knows how they voted because I think they were just frustrated.
Right.
But they saw too much dissonance. They saw too much conflict in what he brought to the table. So interestingly, the old school conservative might have been more consistent than the postmodern.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. And I think Buttigieg, however you say it, I can never really say his name correctly, but I think it'd be interesting is that he's kind of conservative.
Right.
And so he's not going to get the nomination because the postmodern liberal is not going to vote for him, even though he is gay.
So I've wondered, I kind of thought that too, but then I read this Lincoln biography a while ago about how Lincoln, nobody thought he would get the nomination, and he was just kind of the tolerable one in the group who ended up getting actually all of his party on his side.
Sure.
I could see that happening with Buttigieg. That's sort of what happened in Iowa, I think, is like Biden's too old school, Warren and Sanders are too intense, and so the Democrats might go for Buttigieg. It's possible. I kind of, like I said, I wasn't thinking along those lines, but it's possible.
Right, and I had a conversation with some people recently, like the only way, on occasion, well, at least historically, when we have tumultuous times like this, eventually we elect a president who can bring us all together.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, people don't, if you look at, American history, the last president to do that was Ronald Reagan. Even though he was a conservative, right. What was interesting, if you started looking at some of like the Gen X polls and things, who was their most favorite president? It was Ronald Reagan. Yeah. Where did they politically stand? In the Democratic Party. And so he had some kind of grandpa-y way of bringing people in, even though people didn't even agree with him.
Well, and he was a TV actor,
yes,
right?
So there was something warm about him.
Made people feel like he understood them.
Yes, and there have been presidents like that after turmoil who pulled us all together. I don't know if things are moving faster than they used to.
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger. There you go.
I'm back.
I don't think he can be president, though. Right? Okay. Yeah, he's not an American. Yeah. Right, he's a naturalized citizen.
That's silliness. Yeah.
I think he'd run if he could.
I'm sure he would. Sure.
But I don't know. Anyway, I just think maybe could Buttigieg actually bring us together? Would he be what person can kind of heal the wounds and bring us as a people back together to some kind of, political dialogue that's healthy at some level?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'll just say, like, I'm very much in a position of just having no clue where this. There's a part of me that's like, kind of thinking Trump's going to get reelected,
Sure.
And then there's a part of me that's like, we're not, and I'm not. I don't have any clear sense of where things are going, and
right.
Which is in the past, I feel like I've had more of a clear. Sense, and and I think I have my concerns, like not so much even political concerns, but how we are going to do together as Americans, either way that it goes.
Yeah,
I think that's the saddest part, is just how the repercussions of these things.
Yeah, somebody told me recently, all I really want is just wake me up in January.
Yeah,
tell me what I got to deal with. Like, Then I'll adjust. I can't do this anymore.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'll say I am grateful that my hope is not anchored in this system, and that I've got a source for truth, meaning, a guide for how to relate to people that is outside of these parties and governments and systems. So I want to press into that more and encourage our people in that as well. So
I think that's really good.
All right.
I think that's our podcast for today.
There you go. See you next time.
Yeah.